Class, this is Dr. Palmer here. We're going to be talking today about Chapter 8, Section 1, the formation of public opinion. And we're going to today examine the term public opinion, understand why it's difficult to define, and we're also going to analyze the factors that influence an individual's political attitudes and actions, including family and education. Here's some vocabulary that you need to know: public affairs, public opinion, mass media, peer group, opinion leader. Please watch for the definition here as we go through this presentation. Do you like broccoli, blue fingernail polish, hard rock? What about sports? Old cars? Country music? You almost certainly have an opinion on each of those things. On some of them, you may hold strong opinions, and those opinions may be very important to you. Still, each of those opinions is your own view, your private opinion. Public opinion works a little differently. Few terms in American politics are more widely used and less well understood than the term public opinion. It appears regularly in newspapers, magazines, and you hear it frequently on radio and television. Quite often, the phrase is used to suggest that all or most American people hold the same view on some public issue, such as arms control or environmental protection. Thus, time and again, politicians say that the people want such and such. Television commentators tell us that the public favors this or opposes that, and so on. In fact, there are very few matters about which nearly all of the people think alike. The public holds many different and often conflicting views on nearly every policy issue. To understand what public opinion is, you must recognize this important point. Public opinion is a complex collection of the opinions of many different people. It is the sum of all their views. It is not the single and undivided view of some mass mind. Many publics exist in the United States. In fact, too many to be counted. Each public is made up of all those individuals who hold the same view on some particular public issue. Each group of people with a different point of view is a separate public with regards to that issue. For example, the people who think that Congress should establish a national health insurance program belong to the public that holds that view. People who believe that the president is doing an excellent job as chief executive, or that capital punishment should be abolished, or that prayers should be permitted in public schools, are members of separate publics with those particular opinions. Clearly, many people belong to more than one of those publics, but almost certainly only a very few belong to all four of them. Notice this important point. Not many issues capture the attention of all, or even nearly all, Americans. In fact, those that do are few and far between. Instead, most public issues attract the interests of some people, and sometimes millions of them. But those same issues are of little or no interest to many, and sometimes millions of other people. This point is crucial too. In its proper sense, public opinion includes only those views that relate to public affairs. Public affairs include politics, public issues, and the making of public policies, those events and issues that concern the people at large. To be a public opinion, a view must involve something of general concern and of interest to a significant portion of the people as a whole. Of course, the American people as a whole are interested in many things: rock groups and symphony orchestras, the New York Yankees and the Dallas Cowboys, candy bars and green vegetables, and a great deal more. Many people have opinions on each of these things, views that are sometimes loosely called public opinion. But again, in its proper sense, public opinion involves only those views that people hold on such things as parties and candidates, taxes, unemployment, welfare programs, national defense, foreign policy, and so on. Clearly, public opinion is so complex that it cannot be readily defined. From what has been said about it to this point, however, public opinion can be described this way: those attitudes held by a significant number of people on matters of government and politics. As we have suggested, you can better understand the term in the plural, that is, as public opinions, the opinions of different publics. In addition, a view must be expressed in order to be a public opinion. Otherwise, it cannot be identified with any public. Public opinion is thus also made up of expressed grouped attitudes. The expression of an opinion need not be oral. The expression can be written, of course, on paper or in an email, for example. It can also take any number of other forms as well: a protest demonstration, a film, a billboard, a vote for or against a candidate, and so on. The essential point is that a person's private thoughts on an issue enter the stream of public opinion only when those thoughts are expressed publicly. No one is born with a set of attitudes about government and politics. Instead, each of us learns our political opinions, and we do so in a lifelong classroom and from many different teachers. In other words, public opinion is formed out of a very complex process. The factors involved in it are almost infinite. You have already considered much of this in Chapter 6 with regard to voting behavior. In effect, that detailed look at why people vote as they do amounted to an extensive look at how public opinion is formed. In Chapter 6, remember, we described the process by which persons acquire political opinions, the process of political socialization. That complex process begins in early childhood and continues through a person's lifetime. It involves all of the experiences and relationships that lead us to the political world and to act in it as we do. There are many different agents of political socialization at work in an opinion-shaping process. Again, you looked at these agents in Chapter 6: age, race, income, occupation, residence, group affiliation, and many others. Here, look again at two of them: the family and education. These have such a vital impact that they deserve another and slightly different discussion here. Most parents do not think of themselves as agents of political socialization, nor do the other members of most families. Parents and other family members are, nonetheless, very important factors in this process. Children first see the political world from within the family and through the family's eyes. They begin to learn about politics much as they begin to learn about most other things. Children learn from what their parents have to say, from the stories that their older brothers and sisters bring home from school, from watching television with the family, and so on. Most of what smaller children learn in the family setting are not really political opinions. Clearly, toddlers are not concerned with the wisdom of spending billions of dollars on an anti-missile defense system or the pros and cons of the monetary policies of the Federal Reserve Board. Young children do pick up some fundamental attitudes, however. With those attitudes, they acquire a basic slant towards such things as authority and rules of behavior, property, neighbors, people of other racial or religious groups, and the like. In short, children lay some important foundations on which they will later build their political opinions. A large number of scholarly studies report what common sense also suggests. The strong influence the family has on the development of political opinions is largely a result of the near monopoly the family has on the child in his or her earliest, most impressionable years. Those studies also show that children tend to absorb the political views of parents and other caregivers, perhaps without realizing it. Children raised in households in which the primary caregivers are Democrats tend to become Democrats themselves, whereas children raised in homes where their caregivers are Republican tend to favor the GOP. The start of formal schooling marks the initial break in the influence of the family. For the first time, children become regularly involved in activities outside the home. From the first day, schools teach children the values of the American political system. They work to indoctrinate the young, to instill in them loyalty to a particular cause or idea. In fact, training students to become good citizens is an important part of our educational system. School children salute the flag, recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and sing patriotic songs. They learn about George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Susan B. Anthony, Martin Luther King Jr., and other great Americans. From the early grades on, they pick up growing amounts of specific political knowledge, and they begin to form political opinions. In high school, they are often required to take a course in American government and even to read books, such as this one. School involves much more than books and classes, of course. It is a complex bundle of experiences and a place where a good deal of informal learning occurs about the similarities and differences among individuals and groups, about the various ways in which decisions can be made, and about the process of compromise that must often occur in order for ideas to move forward. Once again, the family and education are not the only forces at work in the process by which opinions are formed. A number of other influences are part of the mix. These two factors are singled out here to underscore their leading role in that process. No factor by itself shapes a person's opinion on any single issue. Some factors do play a larger role than others, however. Thus, in addition to family and education, occupation and race are usually much more significant than, say, gender or place of residence. For example, on the question of national health insurance, the particular job a person has, how well paying it is, whether its benefits include coverage by a private health insurance plan, and so on, will almost certainly have a greater impact on the person's view than his or her gender or place of residence. On the other hand, the relative weight of each factor that influences public opinion also depends on the issue in question. If the issue involves, say, equal pay for women or the restoration of Lake Michigan, then gender or where one lives will almost certainly loom larger in the opinion-making mix. Besides family, education, and such factors as occupation and race, 4 other factors have a major place in the opinion-making process. They are mass media, peer groups, opinion leaders, and historic events. The mass media include those means of communication that reach large, widely dispersed audiences or masses of people simultaneously. No one need to be told that the mass media include newspapers, magazines, radio, sometimes the internet, and in particular television, and that they have a large effect on the formation of public opinion. Take this as but one indication of that fact. The Census Bureau reports that there is at least one television set in 98% of the nation's 120 million households. There are 2 or more sets in more than 91 million households and millions more in other places. Most of those sets are turned on for at least 7 hours a day, for a mind-boggling amount of 1 billion hours a day. Peer groups are made up of the people with whom one regularly associates, including friends, classmates, neighbors, and coworkers. When a child enters school, friends and classmates become an important factor in shaping his or her attitudes and behavior. The influence of peer groups continues throughout adulthood. Belonging to a peer group usually reinforces what a person already came to believe. One obvious reason for this is that most people trust the views of their friends. Another is that the members of a peer group have shared many of the same socializing experiences, and so tend to think along the same lines. To put this observation another way, contradictory or other unsettling opinions are not often heard within a peer group. Most people want to be liked by their friends and associates. As a result, they are usually reluctant to stray too far from what their peers think and how their peers behave. Opinion leaders. The views expressed by opinion leaders also bear heavily on public opinion. An opinion leader is any person who, for any reason, has an unusually strong influence on the views of others. These opinion shapers are a distinct minority in the total population, of course, but they are found everywhere. Many opinion leaders hold public office. Some write for newspapers or magazines or broadcast their opinions on radio and television. Others are prominent in business, labor, agriculture, and civic organizations. Many are professionals, doctors, lawyers, teachers, ministers, and rabbis, and have contact with large numbers of people on a regular basis. Many others have active membership of their neighborhood or church, or have leadership roles in their local communities. Whoever they might be, the President of the United States, a network television commentator, the governor, the head of a local citizen committee, or even a local talk show host, these opinion leaders are people to whom others listen and from whom others draw ideas and convictions. Whatever their political, economic, or social standing or outlook may be, opinion leaders play a significant role in the formation of public opinion. Historic events can have a major impact on the views of a large number of people, and so have a major impact on the content and direction of public policy. Our history affords many examples of this point, not the least of them the Great Depression. This period began in 1929 and lasted for the better part of a decade. The Depression was a shattering national experience. Almost overnight, need and poverty became massive national problems. Millions of Americans, 1 out of every 4 in the labor force, lost their jobs. Millions more were impoverished. Hunger and despair stalked the land. In 1929, some 2 million people were unemployed in the United States. Just 4 years later, that number climbed to 13.5 million. In 1935, some 18 million men, women, and children were wholly dependent on public emergency relief programs. Some 10 million workers had no employment other than that provided by temporary public projects. All of this changed the way millions of people viewed the proper place of government in the United States. The Depression persuaded a large majority of Americans to support a much larger role for government, and in particular for the national government, in the nation's economic and social life. As a result, the Great Depression also prompted a majority of Americans to shift their political loyalties from the Republican to the Democratic Party. The Republicans had dominated politics from Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860 to the onset of the Depression. Franklin D. Roosevelt's landslide victory in 1932 began nearly 40 years of Democratic domination. The turbulent politics of the 1960s and early 1970s furnished another example of the way in which significant occurrences can impact and shape opinions. The American people had emerged from World War II and the prosperity of the 1950s with a largely optimistic view of the future and of the United States' place in the world. That rose-colored outlook was reflected in a generally favorable, even respectful attitude towards government in this country. The 1960s and early 1970s changed all that. Those years were highlighted by a number of traumatic events. A special note were the assassinations of President John Kennedy in 1963 and the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and Senator Robert Kennedy in 1968. This period also included the Civil Rights Movement and Vietnam War, with all the protests, violence, and strong emotions that accompanied both of those chapters in this nation's life. The era ended with the Watergate scandal and the near impeachment and subsequent resignation of President Richard Nixon in 1974. Those years of turmoil and divisiveness produced a dramatic decline in American people's estimate of their government, and most especially their evaluation of its trustworthiness. More recently, however, September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks resulted in increased support for the president and for strong United States foreign policy.